This is Joseph Drust, and welcome to another video on Z Classroom. In this tutorial, we'll cover a technique using the ZModeler brush, nanomesh, and surface noise functions inside of ZBrush to create some building assets. Here I just have some quick examples of some buildings that were created using this technique. The models here were all generated inside of ZBrush, then sent to KeyShot to render using the ZBrush to KeyShot bridge. In this tutorial, we'll cover creating a single building inside of ZBrush and then send the model to KeyShot to generate our final render. So to start off, we're first going to generate the actual building's footprint using a plain 3D object. So here I just have ZBrush loaded up, and I'm first going to come over to the tool palette over here. I'm just going to click on any one of these icons to open up the quick pick menu, and I'm going to select the plain 3D object. Now with the plain 3D object selected, I'm returning my canvas and simply click and drag and draw that plain 3D object out on my screen. Now once this is drawn out like so, I'm going to come over here to the actual edit button or press T on my keyboard, and now I'm in edit mode and I can now manipulate this object in 3D. Now the next thing I want to do is I need to change some of the settings on the actual plain 3D here. So I'm going to come over here and first turn on the actual floor grid, and then I'm also going to turn on polyframes. Now if I zoom out and rotate around the model here, you're going to notice that the plain 3D object is facing the front camera here, and I actually need to align it onto the ground plane. The plain 3D object by default also has a lot of topology in it, so I need to reduce that as well. So to do both of these, I'm going to come back to the tool menu here, and I'm going to open up the actual initialize tab down here, and I'm first going to change the alignment to Y, which will now align that to the actual ground plane there. Next, I need to actually decrease the actual topology on the plain 3D object as well. So I'm going to return back to the initialize panel over here, and I'm going to adjust the H divide slider and the V divide slider. So I'm just going to type in 5 for both of those, and now I have a 16 polygon plain 3D object on my screen here. So now that is done, I need to actually turn this into a polymesh 3D object, which will allow me to actually apply the nanomeshes to the surface geometry. So I'm going to come over here to the tool palette and just click Make Polymesh 3D. And then now that I'm done with the floor grid here, I'm just going to turn that off as well. So now I can start manipulating the mesh here to create an interesting footprint for the building. So to do this quickly, I'm just going to use the Control plus Shift selection brush. So if you hold down Control and Shift on your keyboard, you'll end up getting the Select Rectangle brush. And I'm just going to drag that out like so. And then after I engulf a bit of the actual geometry here, I'm going to hold down Alt to turn the selection option into red, and then I'm going to release, and it's going to hide that part of the mesh. Now after this part is hidden, now I have this kind of like L-shaped kind of structure here. I'm going to go over to the actual geometry panel here. I'm going to open up Modify Topology, and I'm going to delete that hidden geometry. So now I'm just left with this geometry on my actual mesh. So now with the geometry like so, we can actually come through now and apply a nanomesh across the entire surface to start generating the actual height for the actual building. So first I need to select the ZModeler brush, so I can come over here to the brush menu over here and then locate the ZModeler brush, or I can hit B on my keyboard. I can then hit Z to isolate the brushes that start with the letter Z, and then I can press M to select the ZModeler brush. Now with the ZModeler brush, if I hover over a polygon on my actual model here and press spacebar, it'll open up the ZModeler poly menu. Now here at the top, I want to locate the Insert Nanomesh action, and with this action selected, I want to change my target to all polygons. Now with the Insert Nanomesh action selected and the target being set to all polygons, if I come across any polys on my model here and simply click and drag, a nanomesh will be applied to all polygons across the model. So as you can see here, I've now applied a cube primitive to every single poly on the actual model there. Now after these polys are applied, if I come back over here and locate the actual nanomesh tab, you'll notice that now the nanomesh portion is now active, and I have a bunch of sliders over here that I can manipulate to change how that actual nanomesh is being affected across the surface geometry. So if I come over here and change the actual width slider, you'll notice that the nanomesh width is now being adjusted. I can change the length, and I can change the height like so. So as you can see, as I'm changing the actual height dimension here, you're getting kind of that tall building kind of look. Now, in addition to just changing these all uniformly, you also have the option to add variation. So if I come over here and change the actual HVAR slider here for the height variation, you'll notice now that I'm getting different heights across that actual nanomesh. And this is going to generate more of that kind of building-like structure. So now with this, I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to adjust the size here to kind of weld those guys a little bit together. So I'm getting something like this. So we're looking a little more like an actual building here. Adjust the height some more, maybe change the width and the length, and then maybe apply some variation to those guys as well. So just coming through and varying those guys up and just changing the sliders and manipulating these until you get kind of a shape you're kind of looking for. Now with this right now, it's being very evenly distributed across that actual footprint that we just created. So I can actually come down to the bottom here and apply some random distribution as well. So just come down here and start manipulating this area here. And now you can see I'm getting even more kind of random variation to those actual shapes. So this is going to allow me to experiment with multiple building designs quickly and easily. So I'm going to continue just manipulating these sliders a little bit until I find something I like. I'm going to come over here and also change the seed element here, and this is going to apply a random seed to the actual random distribution, which even gives you more control over some of the designs you can actually come up with. So I'm just going to scroll through this here until I find something I like. So that's kind of interesting there. And just some of the height values here, maybe some of the length. Just add a little more of a variation to the design there. So maybe something like that. So now that that is done, I want to actually come through and I want to apply a second nanomesh to the existing polygroup here to create a lobby type structure. So now if I hover over a poly and simply click and drag, by default the insert nanomesh across all polygons here is going to apply a new nanomesh to those actual polygons, and you'll notice that it has actually replaced the building part that I already had established. So in order to add another nanomesh index to an existing polygroup, when you're actually dragging it out like so, you just need to hold down Shift. Now when you hold down Shift, this will apply a nanomesh and keep the actual existing nanomesh and just apply a new one to the actual area. So now you can see I have a new nanomesh index created across all those polygons on the actual model. Now if I return to the nanomesh tab over here, you'll see I now have a index slider that is available, and this will allow me to switch between those two nanomeshes that were applied to the actual model. Now I can isolate each one of these indexes as well. So if I come up here and just click on Hide Others, and this will just show you the actual nanomesh you have selected. So if I just select the index 1 here, which is the lobby nanomeshes, I'm going to come through and now manipulate these guys on their own kind of settings here to kind of create that lobby. Maybe put some random distribution on that. Let's throw some rotational values in here too. I'm going to turn off Hide Others so I can see it being affected against the other nanomesh as well. And come through and just kind of adjust these sliders here until I kind of generate an interesting kind of lobby shape on the actual model here. So just coming through and playing with these and just adjusting the different variations here until I get something that's kind of appealing to an actual building structure here. And just the random seed as well. Well, that's looking a little bit interesting. Maybe adjust the width, maybe some of the length. Let's just the rotation some. So there we go. Maybe something like that. Let's just the width a little bit here. So now I have a pretty good start here for a building design. And I can further come in now and start manipulating this with the ZModeler brush. So now that I have kind of the base silhouette of the actual building created, I now need to turn this into real geometry so I can start using the ZModeler brush on it to create some further changes. So as you'll notice, I have polyframes active right now on the model, but the model is not being viewed in polyframe mode. And this is because all the geometry here right now is nanomesh geometry. So if I come over here and open up the nanomesh tab, you can see I still have nanomesh active for this tool. So I'm going to come up to the subtool palette first, and I want to make a duplicate version of this actual subtool. And this will allow me to revert back to that nanomesh if I need to make some changes later on. So I'm just going to come over here and click on duplicate, and now I have two subtools in my palette. So I only need to select one of these guys. So I'm going to select the duplicate version, and then I'm going to turn off the eyeball icon. So now I only have this subtool visible on my actual canvas. Now with this subtool visible, it is still in nanomesh mode. So I first need to convert this to real geometry. So I'm going to go to the geometry tab here and I'm simply going to click on Convert BPR to Geo. This is going to take anything that would be rendered with BPR and then convert it to geometry. So just simply coming over here and clicking on this will convert both those nanomesh indexes on my model into true geometry. So now you can see with polyframe mode active, I now can see the actual polyframes on the actual model. So now the next thing I want to do is, since my model is true geometry now, I want to remove these bottom faces from the actual building here. Since I'm going to only be building the sides of the structure of this, I don't really need these bottom areas. So I'm just going to position the model to the side and turn off perspective, and then hold Control and Shift to get the select rectangle brush, and I'm just going to drag it out like so. And I just want to engulf the bottom edge of the actual buildings there. And then after I have them kind of engulfed, I'm just going to release. And now if I rotate my model a little, you'll see I just have those polygons isolated on the model. Now the rest of the building is hidden right now, so I'm only viewing the bottom polygons here. So next I want to flip the visibility on this so I get the building and not the bottom polygons. So I'm going to hold Control Shift again, and I'm just going to drag a box off in open space, and then I'm just going to release, and that will flip the visibility of my object. So now I'm left with the building, and as you can see, those bottom faces now are now hidden. So after I have that done, I need to remove those bottom faces entirely from the model. So I want to delete the hidden geometry. So I'm going to go back over to the Geometry tab here, go to Modify Topology, and now do Delete Hidden. So now I'm just left with the building actual outside and not that actual bottom area. So this is more what we're looking for the processes we're going to apply. So now I want to select the ZModeler brush and then come through and start manipulating geometry on this model. So maybe carve in some sections, round out some edges, do some other things to make it look a little more building-like. So I'm going to come up here again and make sure I have the ZModeler brush selected. So just select that guy really quick. And now I'm going to hover over an edge. And while hovering over an edge, you'll notice by default it is set to Insert Edge Loop. So I can just simply click on the edge and insert edge loops on my actual model. So I'm going to come to the side here and just insert a few of these guys like so, and then maybe come to this guy and insert some as well. And then I'm just going to insert some areas here on the actual mesh, which is establishing these edges. Now after I have some of these guys established, I'm going to hover over a poly here. And I'm going to hold spacebar to go into the ZModeler Poly Action menu, and I'm going to select QMesh mode. Now if you just loaded up the ZModeler brush, QMesh mode is the default action, but if you were using it previously to create the Insert Nanomesh action, you're going to have to hit spacebar to come in this menu and select QMesh again. Now with QMesh selected, I can come through and now start manipulating areas of my model to generate some different effects. So I can come through and add some kind of like indents to the building there, like so. I can come up to the top, and then as I'm hovering over an edge, add some edge loops again, so say something like this, and then maybe put a dent into the top, so a little area like that, and then maybe cut in some more up here, and maybe add some sort of little kind of air conditioning type unit or something at the very top of the building. And then I'll do something similar to this area here. So just simply coming in, adding some edge loops quickly, and then using the ZModeler QMesh action to add some different functionality. Now, if you want to apply the QMesh action across multiple faces, you could come in and hold spacebar and select a different target, or you can hold Alt and drag, and this will give you a temporary polygroup here, which will apply the action to that area. So this white polygroup, now wherever I click with QMesh a single poly, will apply the action across that entire area. So this will allow you to come through and target different zones on your model, and then apply the QMesh action like so. Now on this back part here, I want to kind of round this out. So right now it's very kind of straight. So I'm going to first come in and add an insert an edge loop right in the center, something like that. And then I'm going to hover over one of these polys, and I'm going to press spacebar to go back to the ZModeler Poly Action menu. And now I'm going to select the Bridge action. And with the Bridge action selected in the Poly menu, I'm going to make sure I have Connected Polys active. Now the Bridge Connected Polys action will allow me to come through and bridge two connected polys. So to use the bridge to connected polys, just simply hover over a poly, and as you're hovering over it, you'll notice a line will point to an actual edge. This will determine which direction the actual bridge function will take place. So I want to bridge these two polys through here, so I want to make sure as I'm hovering over this poly here, the line is actually pointing to this poly there. Now to apply the action, just simply click and drag. And as you're dragging in a horizontal motion, you'll change the actual elevation, and as you drag in a vertical motion, you'll change the resolution. Now, if you have a precise resolution you want to actually control, or a precise elevation, if you undo that and now hover over a polygon and press spacebar, you can come down here to the modifiers down here, and you can actually set a specific resolution or a specific elevation on your actual model. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to change this interactive resolution to a specified resolution. And I'm going to set this to something like 16. So I want 16 divisions around the actual bridge connect to polys there. So now if I return back to this area here and simply click and drag, you'll notice I can change the actual elevation still, but I won't be able to add any more resolution to that actual bridge action. So I'm going to set my elevation to something like that. So now that I have one of these kind of established, I could stop there, but I kind of want to continue this the rest of the way down. So to do this quick, I can actually come through and repeat the exact action that I just applied to other areas of my model. So simply hovering over this poly here and making sure I have that line pointing in the right direction and simply clicking will replay that last action. So now you can see I have that done exactly the same as it was done to the previous area. And then I can repeat this as well by just simply clicking again, and now I have all those areas consistent across that area on my model. So now let's add a few more areas to the actual model here. So let's just come through here and add some edge loops here, and maybe some edge loops here. And then just pull this out a little bit, switch back to the QMesh action, just add something like that. And then let's add some edge loops in here and kind of QMesh one of these faces. Add another little cut through there. Maybe we'll do this on both sides. So something like that. So that's looking pretty decent there. I'm going to come through and actually add a little more definition here, like so. And then maybe add this up just a little bit. So I got something a little more interesting happening on the top of the building there. Now I want to cut in kind of a access doorway for the entrance to this actual building. So I'm going to come down here and just cut in some edge loops quick. So cut one there, and maybe cut one here, and one here. And I'm just going to QMesh this in a little bit, like so. So I have that kind of little doorway established there. And then add some edge loops elsewhere on the model. So I'm going to go through now and just quickly add some loops to kind of square some of these items out to make sure I have kind of square topology everywhere. Because we're actually going to populate more details on the building using surface noise, and we want to make sure we have even topology spread across the majority of our models, so square polygons wherever possible. Now I can come through and do this manually by coming through and just inserting edge loops like so, or I can hover over an edge loop and press spacebar. And with the edge action selected, I can come down here to the target and select multiple edge loops. And now if I come across an edge and simply click and drag, I can actually add multiple edge loops to areas, so something like this. And this will allow me to come through and kind of generate squarish geometry on the model a little bit quicker than coming through and cutting out each of the individual edge loops separately. So just coming through like this. And just make sure when you're actually using this one, you're actually clicking and dragging. Even if you want to actually just insert a single edge loop, you want to make sure you click and drag. And if you add too many, just undo and then come back and just add a single one. Just come through and do this like so. Just making sure I have somewhat even resolution on my model. It doesn't have to be exact, so just somewhere close. Like that, and then let's add one there and one here. And then we're going to hit these guys up as well. So there we go. Now we have a nice kind of even flow of topology on the building there. Now if you do any kind of QMesh actions on your model, you may end up with base polygons again, so this polygon right here. So I want to make sure I remove those as well. So I'm just going to hold Control and Shift to make sure I have that select rectangle brush selected. And I'm going to come across the bottom and then release. That's going to isolate those parts like this. And I'm going to hold Control Shift again and flip the actual visibility on that. And then come over here and do that delete hidden again. So now I'm just left with the upper portions of the building and all the bottom faces should be removed. Now right now I have kind of a crazy polygrouping going on because I was doing a lot of those insert edge loops there. So I want to just come through now and just kind of unify all the polygrouping based on actual face angle. So I'm going to come down here to the bottom and locate the actual polygroups tab here and open that up. And then I'm going to come through here and click on groups by normal. So this is going to look at the actual angle of every single face to the face next to it and then apply a new polygrouping to that area. So you can see here after I click that button, you'll see I'll get a new polygrouping kind of established to all the areas that are broken up by harsh edges. So this is looking pretty good here. And this will come into play here in a minute after we want to kind of change or affect some areas on a model easily using the actual polygroup function. So that is the building there that has been stylized and changed a little bit using the ZModeler brush. So now that we have the base geometry generated through NanoMesh and the ZModeler brush, we can now start generating details on top of our model using surface noise. So here I just have a quick example to kind of illustrate the process we're going to use. Now this example is currently rendered in BPR, and I have this kind of fire escape kind of effect here. So you can see I have like the railings and the staircases, and it's generated now in this kind of like tiling fashion. Now if I rotate this model right now, you'll notice that this 3D effect is going to vanish, and I'm just left with something like this. So if I come over here to my subtool panel over here, you'll see that I just have two subtools over here. And if I turn on solo on both of these, you'll see that these are just literally single plane geometry. So this is just two plane 3D objects that I've then applied surface noise to generate this effect. Now as you rotate around normally, you're not going to see the actual staircase there. But as soon as I render this with BPR, you'll see that all this surface noise is now changed into 3D geometry. I'm actually getting shadows cast off of it, and it's giving this really nice result. So this is the process we're going to use to add more details to our building. So to make this process work, I literally just have two subtools on top of each other and then a different surface noise applied to each. So this tool here and this tool here have two different alpha maps applied to generate the effect. So here are the two maps that are actually applied to the subtools. So this is actually applied to the top subtool, and this one is applied to the lower subtool. Now if I look at these, they're just simple gradient maps here, and depending on where the values are will determine the height of the actual structures. So this one here is generating the effect from the wall and the stairs, and then this one is generating the rails or the outer portion. So if I come back to my model here and literally just isolate one of these guys, so this is the first alpha, and then just click BPR, you'll see that this alpha is generating the kind of bars and the actual stairs from the actual surface. And then if I switch to the second alpha, you can see that this alpha is just generating the actual railings. So when you combine these two tools together with different surface noises on each, you're now getting the completed fire escape look. So this process is extremely fast and extremely powerful to add details to your models. So now that we've explained briefly how this process actually functions, we need to actually create some alphas that we can actually plug into our surface noise modifier to apply to our buildings. Now there are many ways inside of ZBrush to generate an alpha to use with surface noise. In this tutorial, we're going to use the approach of generating some geometry quickly with the ZModeler brush, and then snapshotting that geometry on a 2.5D canvas to create a tiling texture. So to start off, first we need to just select a primitive. So I'm actually going to start with a cylinder 3D object, like so. And I'm just going to make a quick pipe object. So I have the cylinder 3D object on screen now. I'm going to turn off perspective quick. And then I'm going to come down to the bottom and I'm going to go to the initialize tab here, and I'm going to change some of these values. So right now I want to make sure that my alignment is correct, so it's facing the correct direction, so it's laying flat on the ground plane like so, which is correct. And then I want to change the actual divides on this actual model. So here I have the horizontal divide and the vertical divide. So if I turn on my polyframes now, you can see I have a lot of kind of vertical tessellation. So I'm going to come over here and set this to 3, which will basically disable that tessellation. And then I'm actually going to leave the H divide set to 32. So now that I have all those values set, I'm going to come back up to the top here and now just click Make Polymesh 3D. So now my mesh is a polymesh 3D object. And now I can switch to the ZModeler brush and start manipulating the actual object here. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, isolate by letter Z, and then press M to select the ZModeler brush. So now with the ZModeler brush selected, I'm going to come through and add some edge loops to the actual cylinder here. So I first want to add an edge loop around the actual cap here. So this is going to allow me to kind of do some other features if I need to get to them a little later on. So I'm just going to start at one of these edges towards the outer edge and simply click and drag, and that's going to allow me to add that edge loop like so. And then if I come to the actual bottom and repeat the process. So there we go, we got those edged out. Now next thing I want to do is I want to actually scale this up, because right now it's a little bit short, and so if I want to do a pipe, I want to make it a little bit long. So I'm going to hover over a poly on the actual top of the cap here and press spacebar to go into the ZModeler poly menu, and I'm going to locate the actual move action up at the top. And with the move action selected, I'm going to change my target to flat island. Now with move and flat island as my target, if I come across any polys on the top of this actual cylinder here and simply click and drag, it's going to move that entire flat island. So this will allow me to come through and quickly change the actual dimensions of that cylinder object like so. So now I have it set to a good size length for this actual pipe. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to add some welded or actually bolted type areas to the pipe, because these would be connected across multiple pipes to make one really long pipe. So to do this, I'm going to hover over one of these actual edges here, and I'm going to hold spacebar to go into the ZModeler edge action menu, and now I'm going to select the target of multiple edge loops. Now with the target of multiple edge loops selected, if I turn back to my model and simply click on the edge and drag, I'll start generating multiple edge loops across the surface there. Now I don't need this much kind of edge looping established, but I basically wanted to make sure that any single area where I have this kind of joint section being created, that it's a consistent size. So I'm actually going to come through now and remove some of these excess poly loops here that I no longer need. So to do this, I'm going to come through and just hover over an edge again, press spacebar, and now select a single edge loop. And now if I hover over an edge and while holding Alt and click, I can actually come through and start removing some of these actual edge loops on my model. And so I just want to come through and leave some of these areas for these actual welds, and then actually remove a lot of the other ones. So I'm not really too concerned about consistency at this stage. I'm just looking to make sure I have nice kind of areas of welding. And then the one thing I want to make sure is that I have an area on the top and no area on the bottom, because this will allow me to come through and actually stack these in a vertical fashion and have it look a little more believable, as actual pipes would be when they're actually extending a long surface. So now that I have this kind of generated like so, I have consistent poly grouping on some of these loops, but I want to make sure I also have a poly group here as well. So I'm going to come through now and just give each one of these actual poly loops here a similar poly group. So to do this, I'm going to hover over an edge again and press spacebar to go in the ZModeler edge action menu. Now I'm going to select the action of poly group. I'm going to make sure my target is poly loop. Now if I hover over any edges that form an actual poly loop and simply click, you'll see it's going to assign a new poly group to that area. Now if you click and hold while you're still holding, if you press Alt, this will actually allow you to cycle through different colors of that actual poly group. So I'm going to use this one here, which will be a little more visible, so I can actually see it in relation to the other areas of my model. And then to repeat this poly group elsewhere, I'm just going to come through and click there, and click there, and click there. So now I have all these areas now have the same poly group on my actual mesh there. Now the next thing I want to do is actually expand these areas out to give that kind of joint or welded kind of look to the actual pipe. So I'm going to hover over one of the polys that forms one of the poly group loops here, so this one here. I'm going to press spacebar again to go back into the ZModeler poly menu. Now I'm going to select the extrude option, and then as my target I'm going to select poly group all. So now with the poly group all target selected, when I go to apply this extrude option to a poly group, it's going to apply it to every single area on the model where that poly group is applied. So if I come across this poly group here and simply click and drag, it's going to extrude all the other areas with that same poly group. So now you can see that I've gone through and now literally added that kind of joint function to all those poly grouped areas on my model. So now that process is completed, if I turn off my polyframes here, you'll still notice that this pipe is looking quite a bit tessellated still. So I'm actually going to come through now and use creasing and dynamic subdivision to kind of smooth some of these areas out. So I'm going to turn polyframes back on. And to do this, I'm going to come over here to the Geometry tab here, and I'm going to locate the actual crease submenu here. And I first want to change this tolerance to, say, 45. So I'm going to come over here and click on that, and then type in 45. Now with this set to 45, when I now hit this crease option here, it's going to come through and crease all the areas of my model based on that 45-degree angle. So if the angle is about 45 degrees, it'll apply a crease to those edges in between those two faces. So just coming over here and clicking, and you'll see now I've gone through and actually applied creasing to all these areas. Now with this creasing applied, I can now turn on dynamic subdivision by coming to the Geometry tab again, going to dynamic subdivision, and activating dynamic subdivision. Now if I turn off polyframes now, you can see now I have dynamic subdivisions active on my model. So I haven't increased the actual polygon count of the mesh, but now you can see I'm getting the illusion of that model being high resolution. So now you can see I'm getting that kind of nice, soft kind of pipe shape on my actual model here. Now the creasing process, when used with this dynamic subdivision mode, is holding those edges and keeping them harsh. If I come back down to the crease menu and now do an uncrease all, you'll notice that now this is the effect I'm getting with that dynamic subdivision active. So as you can see, the creasing is allowing you to hold kind of harsh edges on your actual model. So I'm just going to apply that back on again, and now you can see we have the pipes holding those edges and looking very smooth. Now another thing to note with actual creasing is that you can actually come through and manipulate the creasing as well using the ZBrush brush. So if you hover over an edge and press spacebar, there is an action underneath the edge menu called crease, and this will allow you to come through and change the actual creasing on your model. So if I come down here to the target and say select edge loop complete, and now return to my model, if I hover over one of those creased edges and hold Alt and then click, it will actually uncrease that edge. So now you can come through and start tapering or tailoring different areas on your model here to generate different effects. So as you can see, as I removed the creasing from that area there, I'm getting a softer kind of edge on the model there. And if I want to apply that creasing back, just turn polyframes back on, hover over that edge again, and simply click, and it will recrease that entire edge loop. Now, when you're using dynamic subdivision mode 2, you can toggle it on and off to see your original cage versus the actual dynamic subdivided one. There's a hotkey for this, and it's just Shift D and D. So you can come through and just hit Shift D to automatically turn off dynamic subdivision, or D to turn it back on. So this is helpful if you're coming in and creasing areas on your model, and you may not be able to select an edge precisely, so you can actually switch out dynamic mode, apply that creasing to that area, and then turn dynamic mode back on. So now that we have this kind of pipe completed, we can actually start using this to kind of generate an alpha for our actual buildings. So now I've gone through and actually generated a whole tool here with a bunch of these little kind of Z-modeled parts. So here we have our pipe that we just created, and then I've also generated quite a few other objects and just put them all in one tool. So I just have solo on here, and I'm just going to scroll through these guys really quick just using the up arrow. Now these guys are created based on shapes and designs from the actual Lloyd's building in London, which was created by Richard Rogers. So these are just some varying assets that I'm going to use to generate a tiling alpha. And I just have them all kind of in this one simple ZBrush tool here. So now that I have this kind of loaded in, I want to start making an alpha with these actual shapes. So since I want to create a tiling alpha, I need to first set my canvas so that it can actually be in a size that can be tiled. So I'm going to come up here to the document panel up here, and I'm going to come down here to the Pro button. I'm going to turn that off. And now I'm going to change my width and my height. And in here I'm just going to type in 1024 for the width and then 1024 for the height. Now after this is typed in, I'm just going to come over here and click Resize. Now you're going to get a little warning that's going to pop up. This is just telling you that this is an undoable operation. So I'm just going to hit yes to that. And now you can see that my canvas has now been resized to that 1024 by 1024 dimensions. You'll also notice that after the resize, my tool is no longer in edit mode. and I have this kind of artifact left from the original one. So first we need to clear this off, so I'm just going to hit Control N on my canvas, and then I'm going to redraw my actual pipe again. So just clicking and dragging out, and then I'm going to come up here and activate edit mode or hit T on my keyboard. So now that I have this in edit mode, what I'm going to do is I want to come through now and start positioning this on my canvas. Now I can use the up arrows, or I'll go over here to the actual subtool menu and select these different parts. And what I'm looking for is the actual consistent size on all these. So I want to see first what's my largest object. So this one's pretty large. And then I want to make sure I establish that size consistently across all those other tools. So the process we're going to use is we're going to position our model here in 3D on our canvas. And then after we have it where we want it, we're going to hold Shift and press S, which is going to snapshot that. Then this is going to allow us to hold Alt and move our model and reposition another one like so. So using this process of positioning our model in 3D on our canvas and then snapshotting that model with Shift S and then repositioning it again is going to allow us to start creating this kind of alpha texture. So right now, every time we do this snapshot process, we're actually turning that model into 2.5D and actually baking it into the canvas. So this is going to allow us to come through and cycle through these different kind of elements here and just position them on our canvas where we want them. Shift S, position another one. Shift S, position another one. Shift S, position another one. And just keep coming through and manipulating our actual canvas like so. So this is a very fast process to kind of generate different variations for actual alphas. And we can just come through and start generating all these kind of little different pipes here. Now if you want to be extremely precise, you can, but for the most parts, just coming through and kind of doing this fast like so is generally pretty easy to do. I'm going to switch to these different types of effects here and just start generating these wherever you want them to go. Now since it's still in 3D, you can actually manipulate these shapes and rotate them around as well, so you can change different styles as well. So if I want to add some areas like this to my model here, or maybe I'll double these up like so, add some sort of parts like this where it's actually ending or connecting. And we're just making interesting kind of patterns and shapes that we're then going to take and apply as surface noise on our actual model. So just reposition these guys, and you can also scale these guys up as well. So if you want them smaller or larger, you can do that too. Now one thing you'll notice as I'm actually generating this process here is that I'm working mainly in the center of my screen. I'm not actually generating stuff over here because I want this to actually tile. So what I need to do is, after I have these kind of generated, I'm actually going to change my actual canvas structure here and then generate some more. So right now I'm just mainly populating the middle sections of this actual canvas here. Here's a big bar thing. Add this guy like so. It's pretty good. And we got a few left. We'll add some of these guys down here. Let me stack those guys. And one thing nice about this too is that since it is actually in 2.5D, you're still getting that depth information. So as you can see, as I'm actually snapshotting this part, it's actually going behind this actual pillar here, which is really nice to generate different effects. We got this guy. Just modifying these up quick. And this can be as dense as you want it to be or as sparse. It's all up to you on how detailed you want to actually make this surface. So now that I have it something like this, now the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to position this somewhere here, and I'm going to get out of edit mode. Now once I'm out of edit mode, by just coming up here and clicking, I can now actually use the tilde key with this 2.5D to actually move this entire canvas here, and it'll actually tile. So I'm just pressing tilde on my keyboard and then clicking and holding and dragging. As you can see now, I'm actually moving the entire canvas there. So as you can see now, I can manipulate this to another kind of aspect here, and now I can do that same process again. So I'm going to draw out my pipe shape again, and then go back into edit mode by pressing T or clicking up there. And now I can start regenerating more of these pipe shapes now on my actual mesh. So this is how you're going to be able to generate that kind of tiling effect on the surface here. So you just come through and now fill in that gap there. And since I put all those areas I already completed in the center to the outer borders, I'm now just working on this middle part. And I can still come through now and select these different building parts, say like this guy here. And you can always scale and manipulate them to fit them a little bit better, like so. So that's going there, and then we'll run this across to here, like that. And let's just go and fix this guy. You may have to adjust the actual scale just slightly to remove any of those kind of artifacting, like that. And we got these guys again. Scale these up and put them here. So, and then we'll connect them. Actually, we'll leave that hole there. Connect these guys. And we'll connect these guys to this pipe. And then maybe do something like that. And then we'll fill this hole in with these blocks. Now another nice thing about this process is that you can also erase the 2.5D if needed. So say I come through and I made, some sort of mess, like I put like all these little guys here, and I don't want these guys here at all. Well, if I get out of edit mode and now come over to the tool palette and select the eraser brush, I can now come back in and just change my draw size a little and now erase any of those 2.5D elements that I didn't like. Now this process is also undoable, so say I erased too much, I can undo that and bring it back. You can also affect this with alphas and other stuff, so I can come through and actually pick different alphas to do my erasing to remove any of those areas that I may not like or may have accidentally placed on my actual canvas. So now that you're happy with your tiling design here that we created using those individual pieces of geometry, we just need to turn this into a tiling alpha map. The process to do this is really simple. You just need to come over here to the actual alpha palette and then open up the actual transfer tab here and then just click on grab dock. Now after you click on grab dock, a new alpha will be created right up here at the top here, and this is now a tiling alpha that you can now export out to load into the actual surface noise modifier or use in other applications. So after you have it selected, just want to come up here and click export and save the actual map out. So here are some quick examples of some other alphas that were generated using this technique. So here's the tutorial alpha that we just created here, and then here are some other ones that were created using the same process. Now as you'll note, since we were doing this in 2.5D, the actual height information is being stored with this actual alpha map. So you can see on these alphas here, you can see I'm getting these nice kind of rounded edges, and these are going to transfer over really nice on our actual surface noise modifier to add nice round elements to our actual buildings. So now that we have these completed, it's time to head back to our original building and start applying these alphas to the surface of our model. So now that we've created a geometry base for our building and some alphas, we can now start applying these alphas to our actual base geometry here using surface noise. So to start off here, I just have our building loaded in, and I'm going to come over to the subtool palette here, and I'm actually going to duplicate this tool again. And this is going to allow us to kind of do that process where we're stacking geometry on top of each other and then applying different surface noise to each duplicate version. So I'm going to come over here and just make sure I have that building selected, and then I'm going to hit duplicate again, and now I have a duplicate version of that actual model. So I'm going to select the duplicate version, and I'm just going to make sure I have the other ones kind of hidden at this moment. So the next thing I want to do is I actually want to scroll down the tool palette here and locate the surface tab. Now with the surface tab selected, you have an option right here that's just called noise. So we're just going to go ahead and click that. Now after you click that tab, you're going to end up getting this noise maker window, which will pop up. And in here you'll see a version of the model here, and then a whole bunch of sliders and options over here on the side. So now with this noisemaker panel open, we need to actually apply one of our alphas to our model. Now, we don't have any UV coordinates established on this mesh, so we're going to be using the 3D noise system. So basically what this is going to do, it's going to take the position of your model in this window, and when I actually click on this alpha tab here to load an actual alpha, it's then going to load that alpha based on this actual camera angle. So quick example of this, if I position my building like so, and then come over here and just click on alpha. Here I have a whole bunch of those alphas I've kind of generated using that process we just went over. And I'm just going to come here and pick one that's pretty obvious. So let's pick this kind of a circular pattern here. So now I have this circular pattern loaded in. And if I come over here and just adjust some of these sliders, so I'm going to change the strength slider. Just move this down so you can just kind of see this really quick. And I'm going to turn the basic noise all the way down to 0. So now you can see that this alpha here is now applied in this direction on my building. But as I rotate the building, you'll see that since this alpha was applied at this angle in which the model was facing when I clicked on this, that when I rotate to the side, that alpha is basically just shooting through the model. So you can see here the back side looks like the front side, and then the sides are actually just the edges kind of extruded or shot all the way through. So this 3D mapping here is basically using a planar mapping based on the camera angle of your model. So if I want this to be at a different angle on my mesh, I just need to rotate the model to the angle I want it at, and come over here and click off alpha, and then click it back on. And if I pick that same alpha again, now you'll see that this alpha has once again been projected in that planar fashion by the camera view, and if I rotate my model now, you'll see I'm getting this type of effect on the actual surface. So this is actually a very interesting way to generate variations on your alphas. So you can just change the camera angle and apply the same alpha, and you'll get different results. So now that you have a better understanding of how kind of the 3D mapping is actually being applied to your model inside the noisemaker window here, we can come through and change these settings now and create an interesting effect on our actual building. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually position my model like this, and I'm going to reload a different alpha. The circle effect is kind of nice, but I don't really want it on this building. So I'm going to come over here and turn it off, and then with my building positioned like so, I'm going to turn it back on, and I'm going to select a more kind of appropriate kind of alpha here. So I kind of want to start with a kind of windowed pattern, so possibly something like this, so something to give kind of the window effect on an actual skyscraper. So we're going to choose this guy here and just open him up. And as you can see, as he's opened up, he's been applied in this direction based on my canvas here. And if I rotate the model, you can see that this alpha, since it was mostly lines, it's actually looking nice at pretty much all angles. So the front angle, I'm getting kind of those window panels, and then on the sides, I'm getting kind of these nice kind of directional kind of flow. So you can see this alpha works pretty well, even with the planar mapped noise we're using here. So after I have this kind of set, I'm going to come over here and just kind of change some options as well. Right now the strength is being driven in a negative fashion. So in order to increase the actual power, you're actually driving it in a negative fashion rather than a positive fashion. So if you want to actually change that, just come down here to this graph down here and just click on this flip horizontal button right here. And this is going to reverse our actual graph here, which is driving how that actual alpha is being applied. So now when we do a positive strength, we're actually going to positively add that alpha into space. So this is going to take all the white values on our map here and then push them away from the actual surface of the actual model. So now that we have that kind of changed, we can come up here and we can increase the strength all the way up. And so that's looking pretty good. So now let's just hit OK and return back to our model. And as you can see, as we returned out of Noisemaker, this is now being viewed on top of our surface of our model here. And so if we want to disable this, we can just come over here and just turn noise on or off. You can kind of see that result. And you'll notice, if I turn polyframes off here, that I'm not really getting that kind of effect of that strong surface noise on the actual model. And this is because right now, this noise is actually being viewed in preview mode. So this allows you to kind of rotate around and see how that noise is actually going to be applied, but it's in just preview mode, so it's just displaying it as fast as possible. Now, to see what this actual noise looks like actually on your model, there's two ways to kind of do this. The first way, you can actually apply it to the mesh here, which will actually turn it into true geometry, or you can simply come up here and click BPR. Now, when I click BPR, it's actually going to render the model with BPR, and you're going to be able to see that actual surface noise applied to the mesh. So as you can see here, you can see all those areas of that surface noise have kind of spiked out of the building there. So now you kind of see I'm getting that kind of building type effect there. Now, if I rotate to the side here and then just run that again, you'll notice that the building is looking okay. If you're doing a sci-fi building, this may work, but it's not really looking like a skyscraper. So we're going to come through and now adjust some other settings in this actual surface noise modifier. So we're going to go back over here and click on Edit. And the first thing we're going to actually adjust is this actual offset slider right here. So if I position my model here to the side and then just start adjusting this offset here, it's actually going to start culling or clipping out parts of the mesh corresponding to the alpha gradient values. So as you can see here, as I turned it on, instantly all the black values on the actual alpha there that were being applied to the model have now been culled out. And as I slide this slider up or down, it'll actually start culling or clipping out more of those values. So what this is going to allow you to do is I can come through and just cull out a certain area. So say something around here, something in the middle, so maybe about 0.5. And now when I hit OK to return back to my model and then run BPR again, you're now going to notice I'm getting this kind of effect on my building. So now my building is feeling a lot less heavy, and I just have these nice kind of rail effects on the actual sides. Now this process is also truly clipping out the geometry as far as BPR or the apply to mesh setting are concerned. Now you can also see that on this mesh here, when it's actually rendered in BPR, I have these kind of rounded areas. Well, you may not always want these rounded areas on your actual mesh. So let me just first come into the surface noise here, and I'm just going to disable the offset setting and then come back. And then I'm going to zoom in to one of those areas that you saw that kind of round nature. So say like this part right here. So now since this model is entirely welded together, when that actual surface noise is being applied, it's looking at this face normal and this face normal and then generating a blend in between the two. So if I render this with BPR quick, you'll see that now it's generating this kind of rounded effect. And you can see everywhere on that actual model where I had those harsh edges on the lower version, since they're all welded together, the actual normals are actually creating this kind of smooth nature to your mesh. So if you want to actually have areas in your model that are not getting this kind of smooth effect, we just need to come through and detach those actual faces. Now to do this, I'm going to come over here first and just turn off noise, and then I'm going to turn my polyframes on. So you may remember when we were actually generating this building, we established polygrouping based on all the face normals on our model. And so this is going to allow us to come through and actually separate single parts or all these different faces all at once. So to kind of generate the single part effect, we're just going to isolate one of these actual polygroups here. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift and then simply click on a point on one of these areas of polygrouping. So just like right here and click. And that's going to isolate that section. Now with this section isolated, I'm going to come over here to the actual Geometry tab, and I'm going to go to Modify Topology, and I'm going to click this Unweld Groups Border. So what this is going to do, it's going to unweld the border of any polygroups on this actual model here. Now since this is the only visible part of my mesh, it's only going to unweld this polygroup. So I come over here and click that. You'll see now that that process has happened, and the rest of the model is now visible. Now it has applied a mask during this process, so I just want to clear that off by just holding Control and dragging off on the canvas. And now if I go back to my surface noise modifier here and turn my surface noise back on, you're going to notice that any of the noise that's actually applied to that actual polygroup right through there that we just unwelded is going to stay harsh, and then the other areas are still going to have that kind of blended effect. So I'm going to turn off polyframes, and I'm just going to render with BPR quick. So now you can see that I'm getting a harsh angle between this area here, but then I'm still getting those kind of smooth angled blends over here. So this is giving me more kind of that style I'm kind of looking for with that kind of harsh fall off there. And this is happening across just that actual polygrouped area where we applied that unweld. So if I want to now go through and apply this unweld to everything on my mesh, I'm just going to turn polyframes back on. I'm going to go back to the Geometry tab here, and I'm going to go to the Modify Topology panel. And I'm just going to click Unweld Groups Border. Now, since I have the entire model visible on my canvas right here, it's going to unweld all the polygroups on the mesh. So unlike the process we just did where we just isolated one of these guys and unwelded, it's going to unweld everything. So I'm going to come over here and just click on that unweld. And now you can see this entire model here has now been unwelded. And now if I go back down here to the actual surface tab and turn back on my noise and zoom in here, zoom in on that area right here, turn off polyframes, and now click BPR. You're going to notice that now I'm getting these kind of harsh angles generated across my model. So this is giving me more of what I'm kind of looking for with those actual kind of lines on my actual mesh. So now I can go back into the surface noise modifier here and just click edit, and I'm just going to adjust my offset back to say that -0.5, and then I'm just going to hit OK. And now I'm going to render with BPR one more time here. And so now I'm getting this kind of effect. So this is giving me a little more kind of interesting shape, and it's not generating all those rounded angles all over my model where I may not have really wanted them. Now right now this is also just the windows of the actual mesh. So since we duplicate this tool, if we come back up to the actual subtool menu here, we can actually turn the visibility on for the actual model we had without the surface noise, the original version. Let's just turn that on quick. And now I have both these guys visible on screen here. So now if I render with BPR, this first model, the original one, is going to just render like normal. And the second one, with that surface noise applied and the offset value set, is going to generate on top of it. So if I click BPR now, I'm now generating this as my actual building. So this is looking really nice for the amount of time it took to kind of generate this process. So now that we have one of these noise passes actually applied to our building, let's go ahead and apply another one to add even more kind of details to the structure here. So I'm going to come back over here to the subtool palette, and I'm going to select the original mesh, and I'm just going to create another duplicate version of that model. So now I have another version, and then I'm just going to click this eyeball icon over here just to hide everything except for that new duplicate I just created. So I'm going to do the same process we just did for the other ones. I'm going to scroll down here to the actual surface tab, and I'm going to activate noise. Now with this one, I'm actually going to come to the actual top view of the actual model here, and I'm going to apply an alpha like this. So this is going to give me that precise alpha on the top, but then it's going to take that alpha and stretch it in like a vertical fashion along the model. So this kind of gives some interesting results and effects of like pillars on the actual building. So I'm just going to make sure the model's facing up like so. And I'm going to come over here and click on alpha. And now I'm going to select another alpha from the list here. So let's just go through here quick. And we're going to get some more of one of the kind of futuristic looking type alphas here that I created. So maybe this one right here. And then we're just going to hit open on that. And then we're going to do the same process. We're going to flip it horizontally to make sure that it's going in a positive direction with strength, and crank that all the way up. And then we're going to turn the mix basic noise all the way to 0. And then we're going to manipulate some of these sliders just a little bit here. So maybe we don't want the strength that high, so maybe something around there. And then we're going to adjust the scale some to make it a little bit bigger. So maybe 1.5 or so. And then we're going to change the offset as well to give it something similar to like the other one we had. So maybe around 0.4 or so. And we can adjust the scale a little bit more or less to kind of get different patterns or results on the actual model here. So maybe something like that. Then we're just going to hit OK. So now return to our model. You're going to get something like this. So you can have this kind of pillar effect now being generated on the building. If we render that with BPR quick, you end up with something like this. It's kind of like pillar formation. Now this formation, I'm actually kind of liking the kind of rounded natures to these actual edges here. So I'm probably not going to go through and break up all those faces and just kind of keep that surface structure. Now if I want to see this with the other building parts, I'm going to come back to the actual subtool menu up here, and I'm just going to turn the eyeball icon on for both of those other parts. And now when I render with BPR, I'm going to have all three of those subtools kind of layered together. So you can see I'm getting this kind of now piping effect on the actual building on this side. I'm getting these round areas here from this actual subtool. So you can see I'm adding more depth and kind of detail to the actual building. So this is a really cool way to just keep coming through and adding different dimensions and styling to your building as you're working on it inside of ZBrush. So now there's two more other things of note really quick. So say I have like part of this model and I don't want some of that surface noise to actually be affected on a certain area. So if I have this guy selected here and just turn on solo, these are those pillars again. So let's say I don't really want the pillars on this kind of lobby area here. Well, to remove this, all I have to do is hide or delete that area of the model, and then the surface noise won't be applied there. So to do this, I'm going to come back down here to the surface noise tab, and I'm just going to disable surface noise temporarily so I can see the building here. And then I'm going to turn on polyframes, and I'm just going to quickly come through and remove this lobby section. So I'm just going to hold Control and Shift, which is going to give me my select rectangle brush, and I'm going to click, which will isolate the part first. Second click will hide that part, and then any corresponding clicks, holding Control and Shift and clicking, will hide the other polygrouped areas on my model. So I come through and just quickly hide that actual polygrouped area. So now that lobby part is now hidden on my mesh. So now if I turn polyframes off and then turn the surface noise back on, you'll see that now the surface noise is not affecting those hidden areas. So now if I get out of solo again, you'll see here's my model. And you can already tell that the pipes are not going to be applied there. And so if I render with BPR quick, you'll see that I have the kind of pipe structure here, but it's not affecting this area on your mesh. So you can actually come through and hide areas, and then even use the delete hidden function to remove those areas completely. And this will allow you to come through and tailor specific areas on your model where you may not want any of that surface noise to be applied. So really nice kind of functionality there. Now, one more thing, after you have all this kind of generated out, you may actually want to turn this into real geometry. So to do this, it's actually easy as well. You just need to come back up here to the Geometry tab, and then just simply click on Convert BPR to Geo. So this is going to take that BPR effect we were looking at for the subtool you have selected, and then convert it straight to geometry. So I have the pillars selected here, so if I click on Convert BPR to Geo, and then go into, say, Solo mode, you can now see that all that pillared area on the model now is true geometry. So now I can repeat this process for the other subtool. So just come and select that subtool there, and then just come over here and click on Convert BPR to Geo, and now this part of the model is also tangible geometry. So now if I turn all these guys back on and turn off solo, you can now see I now have this full building in actual true geometry. So that's the quick process to come through and create a building using NanoMesh and the ZBrush brush and the surface noise inside of ZBrush. We're going to continue on here and render this model out inside of Keyshot. So now I have my building completed here, and I've actually gone through and changed a little bit of the alpha kind of tiling settings on each individual part. And then I've also gone through and renamed these tools here to just make them a little more kind of appropriate. So I've taken the solid part and just labeled that glass, and then taken the wires and labeled them wires, and then taken the actual pillars and labeled them pillars. To rename an object inside the actual subtool palette here, you just need to click on that object, then come down here and just click on rename, and then type in the new name you want. So by renaming these guys, it's going to make it a little bit easier on organization when I actually get into Keyshot. So if I turn solo off here, and here's my building back again, I just render this quick with BPR. You can see this is the final result of the model here in ZBrush here. So I've got a lot of these nice little wires up here on the roof areas, and then a lot of stringy type stuff going on in the building here. So a lot of interesting eye detail just generated through those actual surface noise alphas. And once again, this was only generated with literally 3 pieces of geometry that were all the same, and then 2 of them actually just have surface noise applied on them. So now that I have this model finished, I'm going to send it to Keyshot now to generate some renders. And to do this, I'm going to use the ZBrush to Keyshot bridge. So I have the bridge installed, and to activate this, I need to come up here to the actual render palette up here, and I'm going to open up the external renderer, and I'm going to turn on Keyshot. Now, when this option is active here, if you come over here and click BPR now, it's going to send what is ever visible on your canvas here to Keyshot rather than rendering it in BPR inside of ZBrush. So if I just minimize ZBrush here, I have Keyshot 5 already open. over here, and I'm just now going to send this model from ZBrush here over to Keyshot. So made sure I had that render setting set to Keyshot for the external renderer, and now I'm just going to click BPR. Now after this is processed, you'll see your model should now be inside of Keyshot here, and it should look identical to what you have inside of ZBrush when you rendered with BPR. So I'm just going to reposition this model here, just rotate it around, and then just zoom in by holding Alt and then clicking, and then holding the middle mouse button here to kind of just reposition the model in the scene like so. Now Keyshot will keep rendering your scene the longer you let it sit, so if you manipulate the camera some, you'll see that it's going to reset that render, and then as soon as you release, it's going to just continuously render, and the image is going to get clearer and clearer. So this looks like a pretty decent angle here. So now I need to change my environment. This is actually just a standard environment here inside of Keyshot. So I'm going to come over here to the Environment tab, and there is a ZBrush folder here that would be installed if you installed the content from the ZBrush to Keyshot bridge. And I'm just going to choose one of these environments out of here. So I'm going to choose this Pixelogic Mont St. Michael, and then I'm going to load that one in by just clicking and dragging it over. And now I have that HDR image loaded in the background of my scene here. So now with this loaded, I can hold Control and click in the background of the actual viewport here, and I can rotate the scene around my model. Now right now the scene is looking a little bit dark, so I'm going to adjust some of these settings too. So I'm going to hit spacebar, and this will bring up the actual scene panel over here. Then I'm going to go to the Environment tab, and I'm going to increase the contrast and the brightness. So I'm going to increase the contrast to say something like 1.2, and the brightness to say something like 1.5. Now I'm going to hit spacebar again just to close the environment panel here. My model now should be affected by the environment a little bit more. So if I hold Control and rotate now, I should be getting a little more highlights here. Now right now I also just have the default matte cap material from ZBrush over here applied to my model. So I'm just going to come over here to the Library tab and then select Materials. And now I'm just going to start applying some different materials to the model. So the first material I'm going to apply is some glass. I'm just going to come over here and just select a glass. We'll start off with some like dense black right here. And I'm just going to click this and drag it on my model. Now you're going to want to drag it to the area where the glass is applied, so that actual subtool, the first subtool we had, and just drag it over on the model, and you'll see it update on the model like so. Now I can hold Control and rotate the model some, and you can see that that glass is now getting the reflection from the environment in it, which is starting to make it look more building-esque. Now next thing I want to do is I want to add some different materials to those actual wires and then also to the pillars. So I'm going to come up here to this panel up here, and then I've been using a lot of the snowstorm and the silverleaf. So with the snowstorm selected, I'm going to come over here and just drag this onto the actual wires like so. And then just release, and then I'm going to grab the silverleaf and drag that on to the actual pillars. So now I'm getting this kind of effect on my building. Now I can rotate around and getting this nice kind of glowing type reflection from everything, and it's looking a lot more metal and glass, which is looking pretty nice. So now the environment really isn't matching this building right now, so I could take the time to kind of position it and make it look like it's actually in the scene, but I just want to fill this in with kind of like a flat blue color. So I'm going to hit spacebar again. And now underneath the project panel here, I'm going to make sure I'm in the Environment tab, and I'm going to change the background setting here to color, and then I'm going to click this color thing here, and I'm just going to apply a blue color. So this is just RGB 136, green is 136, and blue is 255. And then I'm just going to hit OK. So the HDR environment is now hidden, and now I just have this kind of blue color in the background of my scene. The next thing I want to do is I want to change the height as well. So right now I have the horizon hitting kind of like this part of the building. So I want to give the illusion that it's actually a little bit taller of a building. So I'm going to move the horizon down a little bit, so something like that. And then I'm just going to reposition it in the scene like this really quick to get some sort of effect like that. And then I'm going to go to the actual camera tab up here. And I'm going to turn on depth of field really quick. And I'm going to set the focus point to be like this part of the building. And just hit done, and then I'm going to change the f-stop so that increases the kind of blur depth there. And then I'm going to turn on this infect slider, and I'm going to put a little bit of vignetting on the scene, and maybe increase the bloom radius just a tad bit, and maybe the bloom intensity. Then I'm going to hit spacebar to close the project tab. And now I'm going to reposition my building like so in the scene. And that lobby is okay, but for this render, let's go ahead and just remove it from view. And then position it something like that. And then we're just going to let it sit here and render for a second. So this is looking pretty good. I'm getting a nice kind of environment reflection, and all these little areas are now filling in with all these kind of crazy details. I'm going to rotate a little bit more to the side. Now the glass right now may be a little bit too dark, so I may want to apply another glass to there. So I'm going to come over here to the library panel and make sure I'm in the materials tab. And I'm going to select the glass dense white. I'm just going to click on that and then drag that over to the actual windows. Now with this glass applied, you're going to be able to start seeing some of these kind of underlying pieces of geometry that I generated in ZBrush here with that surface noise kind of coming through on these buildings. So you kind of see these areas through here. So just giving the whole image some more depth as it's rendering out. So after you let it sit here, you'll start seeing these areas kind of clear up. I'm getting really nice kind of window results in all these areas here. So here is a final example of a rendered image using this process. So this model was created entirely inside of ZBrush, then just sent to KeyShot to generate the final render. So you can see that using these alphas across your models to generate this kind of complex depth is really fast, and it generates really nice results. And this process works really well not only for buildings, but also for vehicles, cars, anything you can think of that has a lot of kind of detailed elements on it that you could just generate a simple alpha texture with and then apply it to your model to increase that kind of visual quality of your work. So that's the end of this tutorial. Stay tuned for more videos on Z Classroom.